What's up, you guys? It's Jim from Backfire. For the last couple weeks, I've carefully tracked every time I heard a ballistics myth repeated online on YouTube, podcasts, etc. And today we get to bust them all down. But because I value your time, we're going to only give 60 seconds per myth. Myth number one, you don't need a gun that shoots any better than 1 MOA for hunting. Well, I totally agree that you don't have to have a half MOA gun to go hunting. And in fact, if you're taking a 50-yard shot from a tree stand, you're going to do just fine, no problem, right? But a more accurate gun is always helpful for you, and it's because of tolerance stacking. Here's a white-tailed deer I looked at in Tennessee one day. Experts say it's a 14-inch vital zone on a whitetail of this size. And my cursor is exactly what 1 MOA would look like. If you make a perfect shot, no problem. But let's say you were a tiny bit off on the wind, or your heart was beating or something, and you made a shot here. Well, now, because of the tolerance stacking, your gun isn't that accurate, and of the mistakes you made, you can absolutely get off. A more accurate gun will always help you to make a better shot, even if it isn't needed. Myth number two is that a longer barrel length will make for a more accurate gun. A lot of you may think that's a myth, but actually there's a time when it's true. Check out my new gun closet, by the way. I got these on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description. It allows you to store your gun under the shelf so you get way more storage space. So you can use it in your safe or however you're storing your guns. But the reason I want to show you this is because of this gun. It's a perfect example of the sight distance. If we're talking open sights, increasing the distance between these two, is going to make your sighting more accurate. So it can help. But when we're talking about precision rifles, it's going to make absolutely no difference. In fact, it really gives more opportunity for the barrel to affect the bullet in a negative way. Often shorter barrels are a tiny bit more accurate. Really, the reason you see long barrels on super long precision rifles is because they want to get maximum speed for making those long shots. On this Tikka T3X Superlight, it has a super thin barrel, and so this gun, it doesn't take a whole lot of shots, 4 or 5, you're going to start to see the groups open up because it's heating. And what I often hear in the comment is, I don't care about the barrel heating because it's a hunting rifle. And what people usually don't realize is, it's true, you're probably only going to take 4 or 5 shots when you're hunting. But I hope you're going to take hundreds of shots practicing and training with that gun. And when you're shooting something super thin like this, it can take 15 minutes for the barrel to fully cool. And so if you're prepared to go to the range, shoot a group, wait 15 minutes, shoot another group as you're sighting in and trying to do everything, then that's fine. But otherwise, you really do get some benefits from a thicker barrel. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. I just want you to be aware of the limitations of a thin barrel. Next, I was listening to a podcast this week, and the host mentioned that he picked a lighter weight bullet in his cartridge rather than a heavier weight bullet so that it wouldn't drop as much. That's, first of all, a major misconception. Weight has absolutely nothing to do with the drop of the bullet, that it's going to drop faster because it's heavier. The only thing that matters is the BC of the bullet and how much time that bullet is going to spend in the air, consequently the velocity, right? And so often, very often, you'll go to a heavier bullet and it actually has a better trajectory than the lighter bullet. So it's something you really just need to check out. BC is really huge when we're talking about the long range value of a bullet. Foot-pounds of energy is the best measure of terminal ballistics. This is one that I fall victim to as well. So foot-pounds of energy is a very simple calculation. It's the mass in grains, 162 grains, going at 2,700 feet per second, and that's going to give you the foot-pounds of energy. It's really, really simplistic, and often I have not found it at all to translate to success in the field. Take a look at this bullet, and you'll see the size of the caliber as it's shot is way different than the size that it expands to Consequently, the frontal surface area, I think, matters a lot when we're looking at ballistics, as does the weight of the bullet and what type it's made of. This is a copper bullet versus a lead bullet. There are just a million factors to look at. And so foot-pounds of energy is helpful, but it's really just barely instructive. There are a lot of things to look at to know if your bullet's going to succeed. 100 yards is half of 200 yards, ballistically speaking. This is one that it can sometimes trick you a little bit. So if you're used to shooting 100, 200 yards, and now you want to start getting into this long range game, you may think of, but you know, if I'm shooting 1 MOA at 100 yards, I should always be shooting 4 MOA at 400 yards. Isn't that how it works? And it's not necessarily true. There are a lot of factors that matter almost nothing at 100 yards, but as you have range, suddenly starts to impact a lot of things. For example, a bullet that is more or less stable may not make a ton of difference at 100 yards, but if it loses stability and consequently the BC opens up, and suddenly the bullet can drop a lot faster, and we could see big differences when we're shooting at 500, 1,000 yards. I do a lot of ballistics gel tests, and one myth that I believed until recently was that the temporary wound cavity mattered a lot more than it actually does. In fact, I read some studies from doctors that actually treated gunshot wounds, and they said a wound cavity that was 15 centimeters, the temporary wound cavity, actually only caused tissue damage in 5 centimeters. And it mattered a lot more if it was hitting a solid, non-compressible organ such as the heart compared to the lungs that are more compressible. And often the tissue damage of the temporary wound cavity was able to heal very, very quickly and didn't cause permanent issues in the animal. I'm not saying temporary wound cavity doesn't matter, just from what I read from those studies, it matters a lot less than I imagined. BENCHREST shooters require extremely accurate powder measures. This blew my mind the other day. I went to go shoot with a good friend who wins 100-yard BENCHREST competitions all the time. Really knowledgeable guy. And when we went out to go shoot, he set up his reloading stuff right there at the bench. And I said, well, you're going to reload right now? Can't you just do that at home? And those 100-yard BENCHREST shooters, they're adjusting to changes in the humidity and the temperature and stuff, and so they reload and fire a few, reload and fire a few. It's a really different game. But I was shocked that they weren't measuring their powder down to the kernel like I thought they would. They were measuring to, you know, within 0.4 of a grain. And they were just using a regular powder dropper, not even, you know, an electronic scale and everything. And the reason is kind of what we talked about earlier. A lot of those differences in feet per second aren't going to make a ton of difference at shorter range. And so I learned something that I didn't realize before. A lot of people say, well, if it has a round nose, you really just shouldn't use it at all for longer distances. And that may be true when we're talking 800 yards, but really up to 300 yards, there's very little difference. Here's an example I got from Hornady's 11th edition. They took a 2,000 feet per second, 30 cal bullet, 180 grains. But one of the bullets was a round nose and the other one had a, ballistic tip on it and consequently had a much higher BC. The difference at 200 yards was only 0.6 of an inch, and at 300 yards, it was only 2.8 inches. So BC of a bullet matters definitely, but really, especially when we're talking about over 300 yards. Hopefully you enjoyed today's video to talk about some ballistic stuff that I've been learning. We'll see you in the next video.